Hello and hi everyone, Bernd here. In this video, we're going to talk about the topic, what do I do when my oncidiums are done blooming? Where do I need to cut? What do I need to cut? Do I even need to cut anything at all? If I do cut, what does that do for the plant? And that's why I would say we have a rich selection of plants here. Yes, many beautiful orchids that are still blooming, orchids that are fading, like this phalaenopsis. Then orchids that are completely faded, like this oncidium. And here you can clearly see it. This flower spike is already really yellow, so it's clear that it's completely dead. This one is even brown. That means you could almost break it off. That's already been broken off. Basically, in nature, no one cuts the plants either. You don't need this support stake anymore since the bloom is over. What does that mean? Here, you can confidently cut it off and you don't even need to disinfect the tool. In this case, because everything here is already dead. There's no sap flow left, so you don't need to worry at all. Make sure that something is being disinfected there. And that's why you can just remove this. You really don't have to worry at all. That something happens is because, for example, the tool wasn't disinfected. And then the plant itself is already done. And it's already producing new shoots. So here is a nice big new shoot, as you can see. That means that the new shoot, which will probably bloom next. With oncidium, it's very common that they only bloom with the next new shoot. There are a few exceptions. One is standing here, the Psychopsis orchid. It also counts as one of the oncidiums. And it has been here for a very, very long time. It's 2 flower shoots. And this is a so-called revolver bloomer. At the moment, it's not blooming. It bloomed a few days ago, and it blooms at regular intervals every few months. From the tip of the flower shoot, a new bloom keeps coming out. And this can, over many years, this can happen and happen. That's why here it would be fatal when you think, hey, there's nothing left of it. Because you might not know the plant yet and haven't had it in cultivation for very long. And you remove the flower shoot because you think it's over. Yes, then you really have to wait for the next new shoot. And if you cut that off again, you might regret it later when you find out. From my perspective, having seen the video now, you know that if you take an encyclia like this one, for example, it's slowly starting to fade now. Basically, the flowers have already faded because as brown, they don't look like that in the standard version. As they are here, don't look like that, are usually a bit pinkish, a little less dark brown, a bit lighter in color. And you could actually go ahead and say, yes, the plant doesn't need the flower shoot. That consumes only energy. But it really depends on the condition of the plant. If you look at the bulbs here, they all look pretty good. And if you look closely, you can see here a new shoot is already coming out. That means the plant is doing very well overall. You can see it's growing here in an orchitop planted with fine Colomi. Oops, just watered. And basically you can wait here as long as you want, until all the flowers are gone and the flower spike either falls off by itself. That takes a while. Or maybe not at all. That it doesn't fall off at all and then you can cut it off. Because visually, it's no longer a highlight when there's a dried flower spike attached. And that's why you can cut it off when it's dried up. And that's always the best thing to do. Here, for example, at this Zycopedilum was an old flower spike you saw. I could remove it quite easily. Here's another flower spike that's slowly fading, and my recommendation is only remove the flower spike. Then, when it's really completely dried up, and then you have it really easy. What else do we have here? A tropical one. Here, the tropical one, or should you already know it? It has been shown several times already, and what it has or what it keeps is quite nice. The faded flower spikes are still here in the plant, as you can see. There is still a blooming flower spike. And basically, it's not very attractive when there are dried up parts hanging around. You always want it to be nice and green. That means you can just go ahead here and what has faded should be cut off. In doing so, you can take a closer look at the plant. If everything looks good, that there isn't too much dried material in there, then you can just use the same cutting tool again. You're still working on the same plant, and then you just do some more plant care. And then it's good when you've removed these flower spikes here. Here is still a yellow leaf. It's not completely yellow yet. And then the plant is actually already done. And you can really enjoy this remaining flower spike here, because it's quite pretty. And everything that is brown and dead is gone. How to propagate a dendrobium. I'll show you that in the next video. I actually have something prepared already. So, let's get to a plant. You already know it from the last video. It's still blooming, so I'm not cutting anything off. For safety, I'm not cutting anything off. And this is the Vanda here. With Vanda, it's like this. Here too, the flower spike will eventually die off. But as long as it's still blooming, and you can see it's slowly coming to an end. Because here, the flowers are getting some brown spots, brown areas. That means sooner or later you have to cut it off. If you don't cut it off, it will dry up, but that doesn't really matter. But then it hangs so unattractively on the plant. That's why it's advisable to cut these flower spikes accordingly. Now I need to put the tools here into the disinfectant solution. Why disinfectant solution anyway? And what can you actually use as a disinfectant solution? We can use a 10%, take a Clorix solution, so a chlorine solution. The tools can just sit in there for a while. It's advisable that when using a pair of scissors, you simply open the blade, open it up so that if the scissors are cutting relatively tightly, so that when it's closed, the gaps are also reached. Because if it cuts too tightly, then it can be very dense. And then nothing goes in there. That's why it's best to put it in a glass like this, open. This also applies if you're working with a scalpel, which I'll need in a few minutes. And that's why it's nice to put the tools in here. So I said a 10% Clorix solution. You could also use pure alcohol, cleaning alcohol. You could also use lighter fluid. What you can also do, when I mentioned the word lighter, you can go through here at the bottom with the lighter. You can also do the whole flaming over a Bunsen burner if you like. You can also hold it over a candle. That basically works too. However, if you use a candle, then soot usually sticks down here. That might not be so optimal either. And what you can also do, if you don't have anything at home in this regard, I think something like, what do I know? Double grain vodka or something like that, something high proof. That should actually work as well. 40% alcohol or 40% alcoholic beverages should actually be concentrated enough that they work really well. Especially when you light it, you can see a flame. That means it's already strong enough and it should definitely disinfect. You can also use a disinfectant spray and that kills everything. What kinds of germs there are. Whether it's fungi, bacteria or viruses. And then you don't transfer that from one plant to another. While you're working on the same plant, you generally don't have to do that. Of course, it could be that you're cutting at a spot on the plant. There is then, for example, a fungal spore, or if you like, several fungal spores. And then you move to another area of the plant. And then you transfer that from one spot on the plant to another spot. That's why, if you're very meticulous, then you do that for every single plant. But basically, a plant should be, if it's already infected, then it's already infected. Then it doesn't help if you transfer it. However, with oleander cancer, it's better to do that regularly, after each cut. Shall we move on to the topic of phalaenopsis? Phalaenopsis is probably going to interest almost all of you, probably really everyone, because phalaenopsis is a genus of orchids that almost everyone has at home. And that's why we see a plant here. It has a damaged leaf here. It has lost that because it was placed outside too early due to a care mistake on my part. And that leaf got full sun exposure. Strangely enough, it's only that one leaf that had the problem. Good, that's the top leaf. And here, in this case, you should just use a scalpel. You could also just leave it as is, because it's not dramatic right now. And then you go and carefully cut the leaf, but out within the green area. That means I'm just going to do it this way so that it fits in the camera. Normally, you can do that a bit more delicately. It's always such blind operations. It's always a bit tricky. Well, the cut is successful. Yes, it has survived. So now we need to cut it out cleanly and make sure we don't catch any other leaves. Now we can see a jagged edge here. Basically, you can just cut out this jagged edge as well. You could have also made a clean straight cut, and that would have been fine. What could you do at this cut surface now? If you don't just let it dry, is that you sprinkle charcoal powder on it. Charcoal powder also has a disinfecting effect. And then that should wrap up the topic. But I'm assuming with a clean cut, that's really not an issue. The plant will then relatively quickly a closing tissue, and then everything should be fine again. But let's move on to the flower shoot. That's the main topic of this video, not this leaf that we've just removed. And what we can see here, it starts to die off and dry out at the tip. But what we can also see at the same time, here, something is sprouting from the dormant bud. And I need to turn this over now. Something is sprouting from this dormant bud. Means, where exactly do you make the cut? Normally, if the plant hasn't been sitting around for too long and is already doing its own thing, that it does, you go ahead and cut the withered flower shoot above the second or third bud, and then exactly that will happen. What has already happened here? And what has already happened here is that the dormant bud, which is located here under the bract, will sprout. You see, it has already sprouted. Means the upper part is not needed for the flower shoot. We can just cut that off. Here on this side, we still have one flower shoot, but it is already correct. Brown. You can tell by the fact that the flower shoot is no longer white, which means the plant doesn't need that anymore. Then we go over here. Let's remove the clip here and the support stake too. And then we see where we cut. Exactly, we cut here, just above the sprout. But in a way that maybe a little bit can still dry out, and that won't be a problem. What we see here is already a shoot. This one here, up here, is an active bud. You can tell by that it has gotten thicker. And then you shouldn't cut that either. That means here, in this case, that would be enough. Right? What has been done is, of course, it has 1, 2, 3 buds here. If your plant hasn't sprouted on its own yet, you should cut above the third bud. Exactly. That's when the bud here starts to sprout. Or what can also happen? If you haven't treated it with hormones, I need to see where the hormone plant is. Where is this hormone booster? Then I must have put it somewhere here. Oh, right in front of my nose. Do you know that sometimes you're looking for something and then it's right in front of your nose? Then that can also happen, that when you cut your plant, you can see it here on the flower shoot. It has been cut off at the top. That your plant is practically forming young plants. You can see how many have formed here. This has now happened with a phytohormone. I'll show you in a separate video. I'll upload that too. It's still available on the old channel. And then you can see how many plants can emerge here. These are now clear plants. You have to say that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 clear caecis that have emerged from a dormant eye. That's already a really great thing. But you can see up here the buds that are still here. Theoretically, they could also still produce caecis. Or let flower shoots develop. Now we just have to wait and see how it develops. In the next few days, when the roots will also come out, it shouldn't take too long anymore, because this plant here is already very, very big. At the same time, we see the plant itself The mother plant is making a new heart leaf. That means she's doing well too. If you paid attention in the last video, then you know exactly what this milky solution is. This is actually this side solution here. I already showed you that in the last video. This plant had a few problems. Mealybugs are unfortunately common with orchids. By now it's quite common. That means you can buy plants at reputable nurseries. At first glance they look great, but the next day little white spots are crawling everywhere. It's totally crazy. This is probably due to ecological orchid cultivation, because there simply isn't an effective solution in the long run to get rid of mealybugs. But that's about it. Here we see it's still an old flower spike. Of course, we need to remove that too. Can we just cut this off here? There goes the Colomi flying around. And then we can take out this dried up flower shoot here, although we could have left it in as well. However, everything that dies off somewhere will eventually rot sooner or later. And then it's not so good, right? But it doesn't really matter. And that's why you see what can happen when you cut your flower shoot properly. Gravel can form, especially in the summer. Form much easier when the temperatures are high. But it can also be artificially created. But there are also some orchid species, natural forms, that tend to produce a lot of kikis. For example, Phalaenopsis equestris is one such candidate. There are plants that have an incredible number of them on one plant. Kikis. And I'll also introduce you to the natural forms in separate videos. Everything is already prepared. And that's why I would say we've actually covered everything here regarding the topic of cutting orchids. Now I have to show you a cool and fun tip to wrap things up. And I'm doing that now. So relatively small, little plant. I've got it held down here because it's getting a bit windy, so it doesn't fly around. And this is a goal for the Cartaginense, which means the eternally long flower shoot. I hope I can show you this. And you see, it has these small, beautiful, I almost said a quirky flower shoot with whites, with whites, white-red dotted flower shoot. I hope you know this. Oncidium Cartaginense. Really cool stuff. So, you see, I've explained to you what to pay attention to with almost all the plants. What matters is when the plant fades. With Phalaenopsis, what can happen is the formation of new little plants. And I think if you still have questions, feel free to write them in the comments. Give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It's really, really important so you don't miss any more videos, because more videos will be coming. Until then, and goodbye.